Some years ago, I was honoured to present the Don Dunstan oration in Adelaide, and during my research, I came across Dunstan's appointment of a young man called Mike Rann. Now, I am told, but you may tell me this is apocryphal, Mike, that it was at this interview with Don Dunstan that he first met Gough Whitlam. Of course, Mike Rann went on to be elected to the South Australian Parliament in 1985, and then held a string of portfolios in the Lynn Arnold government. Became Premier in 1994, and as we all know, held that position until October of this year. I was very fortunate during my time at Prime Minister and Cabinet to witness the Premier's foresight and strength of character and leadership at the meetings of the Council of Australian Governments, COAG, able to see his interest across the breadth of policy, from arts and social inclusion to economic development and climate change. I can think of no one who is more informed to be the speaker to bring this symposium to a conclusion. So please welcome the former Premier of South Australia, former National President of the ALP, the Honourable Mike Rann.
Well, thank you very much to Chancellor Peter Shergold, and also, of course, to Vice-Chancellor Janice Reid, distinguished guests all. Was delighted to have been invited here to participate in this symposium. And as you just heard, I met Gough many years ago, and regard it as a great privilege to have been a friend of Gough and Margaret Whitlam for many decades. The story is right. I was a very nervous 24-year-old from New Zealand. I went to apply for the job of press secretary and speechwriter to Don Dunstan. Was obviously very nervous. Went down for the interview at Parliament House. There was this figure in a white or maybe ivory safari suit, and at the end of this hour-long interview, Don said, "Look, Gough Whitlam's my next appointment. Would you like to meet him and have dinner with him tonight?" And I thought, well, I probably won't get the job, but this will be an amazing story to tell. Gough was in Adelaide as Leader of the Opposition. It was not long after the dismissal, and was giving a speech there. And afterwards, Gough always told people at various functions that I was at when I was leader of the Labor Party in South Australia that he convinced a reluctant Don Dunstan to appoint me. But however, what he actually did say that night was, whispered in my ear, "Go east, young man, go east." So here I am. And of course, as Bob Ellis has said, that at 95, Gough is the kindly Olympian deity that young Laborites would most like to befriend. If you look back further than when I met him, let's remember that in 1967, the new leader, Gough Whitlam, had inherited a party that was dispirited and accustomed to permanent defeat. He deconstructed and rebuilt the ALP, modernising it, intellectualising it, and exorcised from it the bigotry and the racism that had soiled and shamed it from the earliest years with the White Australia policy. In opposition and in government, he forged an extraordinary partnership with Don Dunstan. They were the Washington and Jefferson of Australian Labor politics in the 60s and 70s. They were champions of change, maestros of the possible, leaders who incessantly summoned their party and the Australian people to move forward. And given that Gough, through his abolition of university fees, gave a generation of working-class teenagers the hope and education that made and enriched their lives, today's topic is particularly relevant. And I thought today that I'd present to you as a case study the story of South Australia during almost a decade of extraordinary transition, and to discuss with you both the challenges that we faced and the decisions that we took to help rapidly diversify a labour market in peril. And along the way I want to talk about some of the broader issues relating to how we can maximise local resource industry jobs and also skills, resource industry jobs and skills for disadvantaged Australians, the crucial importance that manufacturing must play to Australia's future and ways that governments can help encourage and embrace the new green jobs of the future. Well, I was sworn in March 2002, following what was essentially a tied election whose outcome would be decided by a maverick Liberal independent. What did we face back then? Well, unemployment was through the roof, youth unemployment was massive, our school retention rate had completely collapsed, young people were dropping out of their own futures. Our traditional manufacturing base, automotive and white goods, was under extraordinary pressure, as was our state's ageing infrastructure. South Australia's industry policy had focused on privatisation or massive government subsidies to call centres to set up in Adelaide before they moved offshore. In one case, the jobs subsidised by government grants of $28,000 per job. Massive waste of taxpayers' money. South Australia was often derided as a rust belt or rust bucket state. Our state's collective psyche was characterised by self-doubt because prospects always looked better elsewhere. And we're in danger of defining ourselves by what we couldn't do rather than what we could. And our first cabinet meeting was presented with a scenario of decline, with South Australia's population actually predicted to go backwards when we reached 2025. I'd spent more than 8 years enduring the hard slog of opposition after the State Bank collapse, and my colleagues and I weren't prepared to preside over genteel decline, so doing nothing, leaving the economy to market forces, wasn't an option. And despite having a precarious hold on power, we decided to govern as if we had a record majority. And that was perhaps the critical breakthrough mindset for us. I said we're going to pretend in our heads we've got a majority of 10 rather than a sort of majority of 1. And one of the first moves we made was to ask business leader and mining magnate Robert Champion de Crespigny to chair a new and very powerful economic development board that reported directly to me, and that board included members drawn from around Australia and even overseas. We wanted the best, and we wanted people for their talents rather than as representatives of particular organisations, and we weren't interested in people's political affiliations. Quite frankly, we didn't have the luxury or the time for the traditional party tribalism or political patronage. That group included not only leading Liberal Robert de Crespigny, but also Carolyn Hewson, a range of senior business leaders, the ACTU's Grant Bellchamber, former WTO Director Mike Moore, and Bob Hawke. And first up, we commissioned a warts and all review of South Australia's economic position, and the results which we made public were shocking. A future of decline on every front, a state with barely a pulse. So we convened a series of forums that brought together the leaders of business, industry, unions, regions and universities, as well as the environment and community sectors. And we asked them where they wanted our state to be in 10 years' time. And the result of these forums and a large public consultation initiative produced what would be perhaps our most ambitious reform, South Australia's strategic plan. Rather than another list of political promises linked to an electoral timetable, it was the first comprehensive 10-year plan for prosperity and social well-being prepared by any Australian government. And I should say that some of my political colleagues interstate and overseas thought it was politically suicidal for us to tie ourselves to a raft of publicly available performance indicators upon which we'd be judged by an independent audit committee every 2 years. Every 2 years, there is a very thorough process that takes many, many months of independent people who judge us about whether we're on track or not on track to reach those 10-year targets. We then established ExCom, the Executive Committee of Cabinet, to oversee compliance with the plan across all areas of government. Each minister who presents a submission to Cabinet must show how that initiative helps the government and the state meet the relevant targets in the plan. And the CEOs of government departments are regularly brought before ExCom to determine what progress is being made on reaching benchmark targets in their areas. And we actually changed the law so that in South Australia the heads of departments, rather than reporting solely to individual ministers, which tends to create a sort of portfolio silo approach, actually were appointed by me, reported to the minister, but also reported directly to me by law in terms of their compliance with the state strategic plan across government. ExCom was chaired by me as Premier, included 4 of our most senior ministers, as well as the Chair of Economic Development, and also Monsignor Capo, David Capo, our Social Inclusion Commissioner, who's been a major social innovator in our state in reducing homelessness by 50% in terms of city rough sleeping, and also significantly improving school retention, a huge turnaround, and leading major reforms in mental health and most recently in disability. Capo also sat on our Economic Development Board and has been one of our state's great change agents. Through the strategic plan and through ExCom, I wanted to demonstrate that we could be a government that was pro-growth and pro-business and pro-jobs, but as well as being a leader in social justice and a leader in the environment as well, and to prove that these objectives were not mutually exclusive. Our first imperative was to move as fast as possible to diversify the economy to stop the job roll. We were particularly concerned about our regions, and it was interesting hearing about regions today, but which were bleeding industries, jobs and young people. So we decided to embrace a mining future, a thick overburden of rock that covers most of our state, that traditionally made mining in South Australia much harder than in the resource-rich states. So we stopped the South Australian disease of government handouts to dying industries and invested that money in a mining exploration initiative. We actually subsidised exploration drilling. And the good news is that our PACE program, the Plan for Accelerated Exploration, helped us achieve a 5-fold, then a 10-fold increase in mining exploration. And more importantly, the explorers found countless billions of dollars worth of mineral deposits. It was a government scheme that cost a modest $30 million, and never has there been a bigger bang for buck for a government industry initiative. We had intervened, collaborated with industry, and it paid off. And we also changed the regulatory environment to make it much easier to go from the exploration stage through to export, so that we're now listed as the second fastest in the world. We've now more than quadrupled the number of mines in the past 5 or 6 years, with scores of new mines on the way. And of course, in my last days as Premier, I signed the indenture for the Olympic Dam expansion, which will become the world's biggest mine, generating tens of thousands of jobs. And just as importantly, in my view, we've also secured an agreement with the Commonwealth to open up the giant Woomera Defence Area, which is about the same size as England, for mining, which for 7 decades was completely out of bounds for miners. And this will unlock about $1 trillion worth of minerals. But for us, the success of our mining strategy is not measured solely in terms of mine output, export tonnage, or even the raw jobs figures. It's also about the development of skills and the creation of employment opportunities for people in our regional towns and cities and remote communities. And that's why our negotiations with BHP over Olympic Dam focused on maximising local jobs and opportunities for local manufacturers, other businesses and contractors, as well as doubling the amount of processing onshore rather than going offshore. For me, I particularly wanted mining to offer life-changing employment opportunities for those who have previously faced the toughest barriers to finding meaningful work. And I must say I've been heartened by recent developments such as BHP Billiton's strong involvement in job training for those involved in a prisoner reintegration program, and Iluka Resources programs for Aboriginal employment and training, its mentoring of Aboriginal businesses, and secondary and tertiary scholarships for Indigenous students. And Oz Minerals, pre-employment training and job opportunities for local Indigenous people, which won the inaugural Social Inclusion in Mining Award for the industry. Now, none of these initiatives are tokenistic. Indeed, in a state with about 1.5% of its population Indigenous, mining companies like Oz Minerals and Iluka, that I've just mentioned, are each employing close to 20% of their workforce from the local Aboriginal population. But our economic development strategy hasn't just been a one-trick pony on mining. We've also, again driven by state government policy interventions, secured more than $3 billion of investment in renewable energy, again centred on our regions. We haven't put any money into it. We've just made the regulatory environment much easier for the energy companies in order to satisfy their quotas under the federal scheme to build their wind turbines in South Australia rather than elsewhere. With just over 7% of Australia's population, we have 54% of the nation's wind generation. And if we were a nation rather than a state in terms of wind power penetration, in terms of the local market, we'd be second only to Denmark. After restoring state finances and securing a AAA credit rating, we have also increased the government's infrastructure spend fivefold. And we also now have $80 billion worth of public and private infrastructure projects on the books, unprecedented in South Australia. Our University City push has built on our intellectual infrastructure and has seen a big increase in overseas students, which had been previously neglected, and as well as attracting prestigious overseas institutions to establish in Adelaide, including Carnegie Mellon University, University College London, the Royal Institution of Science, and soon Laureate University. And this was combined with a big push to encourage migration. And like a number of previous speakers today, including Barry O'Farrell, I'm a huge supporter of migration. There are, of course, sceptics who believe that an embrace of mining must come at the expense of our manufacturing sector. And that's why, since coming to office, we've been hell-bent on pursuing defence contracts worthy in themselves, but also to underpin a high-value, highly skilled manufacturing industry involving a range of smaller firms as well as multinationals. In other words, upskilling local businesses to win future contracts in order to employ people. Having secured the submarine project in the 80s And building on the skills and expertise that centred around the Defence Science and Technology Organisation, we launched a successful bid to win the $8 billion air warfare destroyer project. And competing successfully against bigger states to win this project was obviously important in terms of securing new jobs, including lots of science-based, technology-based jobs, but was also a new skills in trades, but also crucial to building our state's confidence. And since then we've gone on to win the biggest ever defence project in Australian history with the $35 billion next generation of submarines. We as a state again directly intervened, a very important word in this talk, by investing in defence skills development and also putting our money where our mouth was by investing $400 million to build a state-of-the-art naval shipbuilding precinct at Techport, the third of our purpose-built defence industry clusters, the other two in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And for a small state and for smaller and medium-sized industries, clusters are often a key ingredient of success. We've adopted a similar approach with our Theberton Bioscience Precinct that includes a business incubator close to the city, with our Mawson Institute for Advanced Manufacturing, linked to Technology Park and the University of South Australia, our big investments in plant and viticultural science at the Waite Institute of the University of Adelaide, and with our most recent conversion of the historic and heritage-listed Glenside Psychiatric Hospital into Australia's most innovative screen hub cluster. Over the past 8 years, we've been inviting a series of world-class experts, we call them thinkers in residence, to Adelaide, to assist us to face our economic, social and environmental challenges. People like Baroness Professor Susan Greenfield guiding us on science policy, the late Stephen Schneider, who shared the Nobel Prize with Al Gore, helping us to develop Australia's first climate change legislation, New York social entrepreneur Roseanne Haggerty with her innovative ideas that we've backed in terms of tackling homelessness, and Professor Laura Lee advising us on design, architecture and planning, given that the revitalisation of our capital city has been central to our economic development strategy, with a massive investment in urban renewal and a series of infrastructure projects, including public transport, trams and so on. Most recently, we've had Professor Joran Roos, an expert on innovation in manufacturing. He's based in London, but has advised Sweden and Finland and Denmark and Switzerland on manufacturing, high-level manufacturing, and I want to commend his work to the Institute. He's been working with manufacturers, about 10 manufacturers in South Australia, and with policymakers to help build a successful manufacturing future for South Australia, particularly for those firms focused on high value, low volume, niche product or service or niche system offerings. He's also been advising us on how to leverage manufacturing opportunities from our big mining developments. Mining, of course, is becoming increasingly sophisticated and must now be seen as part of the new economy, not the old. It's no longer just the quarrying mentality. I firmly believe that for Australia, as well as for my home state, we cannot allow manufacturing to wither, because once it is lost, it is very hard to rebuild. Countries that have recovered best from the global financial crisis are all strongly based around high value-added, export-oriented manufacturing. And Joran says a healthy manufacturing sector is crucial for any advanced economy with ambitions to maintain economic and social well-being. After all, manufacturing makes the biggest investment in applied research and development, with big collateral benefits for the rest of the economy. And Professor Roos points out that manufacturing is also the key driver of productivity improvement, still makes up the biggest share of world trade, and is central for export earnings that we need to pay for the cost of importing things. He contends that each job in the manufacturing sector generates between 2 and 5 jobs in the rest of the economy, and that without a vibrant manufacturing base, societies tend to divide more starkly between rich and poor, between those who have access to steady, well-paying jobs and those whose jobs are less secure and precarious. In Australia, Joran argues that there's a pressing need at the manufacturing firm level to encourage better innovation and management competence, combined with business partnerships with research and expertise centres like the ones I've mentioned already. With manufacturing both in transition and under massive stress, particularly in a nation like Australia with our high exchange rate, government policy intervention and engagement remains critical. And that's why we have to regard the Olympic Dam mine and its value chain as a cluster in itself. And in the carbon-constrained world, that is why the South Australian government has purchased the large Tonsley site that was formerly the Mitsubishi car plant and will develop it to become a $1 billion clean tech hub, a first for Australia, underpinned with the involvement of Flinders University and by a $125 million Sustainable Industries Education Centre that will train more than 8,000 students a year, furnishing them with the skills required for the clean green jobs of the future. And this is part of a major investment we're making to generate an additional 100,000 training places to enable South Australians to be better positioned to make the most of the new economic opportunities now within our grasp. And our Skills for All reforms aim to modernise and revitalise vocational education and training so that it's more responsive to the needs of students, business and industry, as well as much better linked to our schools and universities. And training will be available to those without qualifications who are seeking new skills and opportunities, and for existing workers who want to lift their skills with new technologies and improve their productivity. And we've got a number of industry-specific measures for the mining industry. The Industry Workforce Action Plan has been developed with the mining sector and is being led by the Resources and Engineering Skills Alliance, key resource companies and major contractors. One other area, of course, is regulatory reform, and our Economic Development Board piloted a major effort to reduce regulations, and the red tape reduction scheme has seen a 25% decrease in regulations. So South Australia, what is the end result? South Australia is in a vastly improved economic position and poised to do much better because our government has been prepared to intervene and work with industry to turn a state around and to kickstart employment growth. In the deepest heart of the GFC, South Australia recorded strong economic and employment growth. It reported its lowest ever unemployment rate in the middle of the GFC, and indeed the lowest unemployment rate in Australia, an achievement previously unheard of. We also, during the past 9 years, have had, and this is important when we're talking today about the casualisation of the workforce, during the past 9 years had 20 times the full-time employment growth compared with the previous 8 years. In public policy, as in industry, you have to invest in research, collaborate and innovate in order to survive and flourish. And I hope today I've been able to demonstrate that you do not have to be big to be a leader, although Gough was, but like Gough, you have to be bold. Thank you very much.